Paper rounds are they're criminally underpaid, and I think at one point I was like, I'm not going to put a flyer for a Chinese restaurant and all these other places in this paper, and I just started getting pissed off and lazy, and then started putting them under my bed. And my plan was these flyers, I'm just going to put them in the
Yeah.
recycled bin.
Dane, I really appreciate you talking to us.
Thank, uh, uh, thank you for having me. It's not a problem at all. If I appear lethargic, it's because I just came from football. It's not because I'm like, oh, this is boring. I'm just, yeah, just trying to get my cardio up.
Yeah. Does that help you? Do you do stuff like that to prepare for tours?
Yeah, well, not just tours. I'm just like, I'm not a gym person. So if I'm going to do exercise, I really like it to just be a bit more entertaining than doing repetitive exercises. Something weirdly rodent like about like gym exercises and doing reps and stuff, I feel like. So
Yeah, well, you and me both. I usually last about 6 weeks and then that's it. I'm done. I can't be bothered after that.
6 weeks is good. I always look for an excuse. Like I literally will be in the gym, and if I hear something I don't like on the news, I'll be like, "Fuck this," and just
Yeah,
like, yeah, back it up.
I'm with you. Any excuse. My gym was shut for 2 weeks over Christmas and then it was shut for a week after to be decorated, and that was it. I just never went back.
But if they're not going to put in the effort, why should you? That's how I feel.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, I mean, talking about the tour then. First of all, what's Bapsquire? What is that?
It's basically another one of my aliases. So, growing up in Southeast London, we all had a number of different aliases and sobriquets to refer to each other by. So I've gone by like obviously Joke Dizzer, like the rapper Smoke Dizzer. Shaolin 66 was one of my names as well. Uh, Danger, which is some of my friends at university used to call me. But Bapsquire was one of the names I came up with, mainly because uh, I felt like my name Baptiste sounded too Caribbean when I was applying for jobs,
Right,
and
okay.
kind of had a preconceived notion of who I was. So Bapsquire was like basically me, ironically anglicizing my surname to appear more affable to British audiences.
All right,
So
okay.
then from there, it basically evolved into like more of a mature name for me as a nickname. So just one of my many nicknames, basically.
Right. I was going to ask, I mean, you've talked about mature. I mean, does that tie in with the theme of the show?
Yeah, because I've not been because the show started sort of in Edinburgh, and I've not been at the Fringe for like 5 years, like half a
Right.
decade. And going from being like the first Black British nominee in 2014, like the landscape has definitely changed. So the show is about basically me trying to find my new space where the landscape has kind of changed to reflect more of the diversity I feel like I kind of pioneered.
Right,
Because
okay.
when I went up to the first time I went up to Edinburgh, like the major agencies or agencies at large didn't really have an interest in signing Black British acts, and they weren't
Yeah.
massively supported. You didn't see, and you just didn't see as many. And so since then, obviously that's kind of changed a lot as well. But essentially, yeah, the show is kind of that is about me kind of growing up, I guess, and also the nuance of that within the entertainment industry, because I think it's definitely one which kind of prolongs youth. And for
Right.
people who are in denial about getting old, I think they tend to kind of resolve that by remaining in the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
But it's about me looking forward to midlife and looking at the world again through much more older and wiser eyes, and yeah, just thinking what that's like in the post pandemic world too.
Okay. I mean, just going back before we touch on that, I mean, you've talked about being the first black comedian to win an award at the Edinburgh Festival. I mean, you've talked about changes. I mean, what changes have you noticed?
Well, I've mainly noticed that a lot of the agents and a lot of the external bodies that are within entertainment or within comedy are a lot more cognizant of the fact that Black British comedians are a lot more commercially viable and successful and accepted than they have been. Because obviously, since 2014, you've seen the rise of acts like Mo Gilligan and Munya Chawawa, Judy Love, but you've also had acts like Axel Blake, who won Britain's Got Talent. And I was largely involved in writing the show that he's just finished touring with recently
Right,
as
okay.
well. Um, so that's kind of been one of the changes as well. I think there's definitely been, it's not as easy as it has been historically for critics to play down the experience as narrated by Black British comics of race relations or
Right.
working class comics and their experiences. So I've noticed that change where there's been a lot more of a democratized voice or critical voice in comedy because of
Right.
social media. Um, I think what's also changed as well is that we are definitely feeling the effects of austerity as well. I think
Yeah.
it was already something that was very difficult for you to enter in and prosper in if you don't have the financial backing or nepotistic connections of your family. And while I don't think that's changed, I think the conversations about that fact have become a lot more explicit. And there are a lot more platforms for people to speak about injustices they see within art and on a larger social level as well. So I think that's kind of changed. And I think that people now have a lot more descriptive tools to talk about their experiences.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it was different when you started. But what advice would you give a young comedian starting now? No, not necessarily a black comedian, but just a young comedian in general.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the same. I think for all comics, my advice is to be truthful to yourself. I think that I do appreciate for a lot of comics nowadays, there's a massive pressure for you to conform and to maybe perform in a way whereby you may attract more likes, and there's new metrics for you to measure your skill, which can be quite tough. And as hard as it seems, I would say to use social media, but don't let it use you, in the way that if it's a way of you reaching an audience without having to go through gatekeepers, and you can kind of circumvent a lot of the old barriers, definitely do so. But don't fall into the trap of feeling like you have to conform to trends you see on social media, because there is a massive difference between content and art. And one day, 10 years down the line, no one's going to give a fuck what you put in your stories. So definitely remember to see yourself in that respect. And also to do this art because you like it, because one of two things can happen. You may not make money straight away or make the money you'd like. So that can't be a motivator. But at the same time, if you start making a shitload of money, then it becomes very difficult for you to have your artistic inspiration, if you're just, because you can become very numb to the money as well. And there's certain things that money can't buy. There are so many very successful millionaires and very, very rare people that have who are no longer with us, and money wasn't able to save them. So that would be my advice. But I think the main thing would be for people just to enjoy every moment on stage, because being able to say what you want on stage is a rare and having the competence to do so is a rare skill that very few people get to experience their whole lives. So grab that with both hands and use it as much as you can, irrespective of money and status or these carrots being dangled in front of you.
Okay, I mean, we've talked about the award and how that, obviously, like you said, you saw things change. But for you, when did you notice a change in the kind of attitudes towards you or your career in general?
Well, I think my career, I kind of was quite fortunate, because I think when I did get the award, I think that was a shared victory, not just for myself as a Black British actor and other acts, but also for being that I came up on the circuit. I definitely noticed that there was somewhat of a schism between fringe comedians and club comedians. So it definitely was, I think, positive for other club comedians to feel that they can not only go to Edinburgh, put on a show on, but they can also be recognised critically. Because in the years that followed, I think it was like Sarah Callahan, Kay Kurd, Larry Dean, Michael Odewale, who all went on to do the same time and the same room. And 2 of those 4 acts were nominated for Best Newcomer after that as well. So I think it was definitely a win for myself and other fellow circuit comics. And yeah, I think for me, the change, I didn't know about being the first Black British one until I got back to like the UK, back to London. It kind of, that then snowballed into me doing Sunny D, was my first sitcom. And that turns out to be the first sitcom written by a Black person and with a Black cast on the BBC in like over 20 years.
Wow, okay.
So, it began to kind of avalanche and have a lot of these career firsts.
Did that open a lot of doors for you? Did that kind of, those sort of, when people realised that, there is a market for this?
To be honest, I think it opened a few doors here and there, but for the most part, I've always felt, because my trajectory was so different to my peers, I've always had to go a different way of proving myself. So being managed by UTC came about because no other agent was interested in working with me in the way I wanted. So I had to kind of co-fund my own agency and basically create a management for myself. Then, working on my first sitcom, being the first Black British sitcom on the BBC, very few other writers and collaborative writers I could work with to realize the script. So I ended up doing that myself for the first time. Led on to like doing Live from Soho Theatre, which is on Amazon Prime now. And again, it was like I had to renegotiate a contract so that they couldn't buy out all of my material straight away for like such an extended period. So a lot of stuff was kind of on the job training, I guess. But yeah, I guess it definitely cemented me and gave me a lot more credibility but I wouldn't say that all the doors were open right away. I think with comedy, it's one of these things where you still always have to kind of prove yourself
Yeah.
and ground yourself. Because I remember I did live at the Apollo in like 2015,
Right.
maybe 2016, and then literally the day after I did the Backyard Comedy Club, and there was like 14 people there.
Yeah.
So it's very grounding. But yeah, it definitely. I just think it definitely made me more aware of what I could achieve.
Right.
And yeah.
Okay, so let's look forward then to the new show. I mean, you've talked about midlife. I mean, when you were, I don't know if you're the same as me, but to me, when I was 16, 17, being 30 was middle-aged.
Yeah.
I mean, when you were a teenager, what did you expect middle-aged life to be, or what did you think it was going to be?
That's a really good question, because basically my worst nightmare when I was a kid was going to be being 30 years old and living at home and not having any money or not being happy in my career. And those things all happened at 30 years old. So I was like, well,
Yeah,
I have fucked up. But I think it was being at rock bottom, which basically pushed me. That coincided around the same time. Then it wasn't too long after the credit crunch happened in 2008.
yeah.
Those two major existential shifts that happened in my life basically made me realize, number one, that there is no secure job or no secure career. And just because you follow the path of doing what people expect you to do doesn't mean you'll be rewarded at the end of it, because there'll be a lot of people who are dealing with the plight of working their whole lives and not having a pension. And just to name one thing. So that kind of gave me like a fuck it attitude, because before I think that there was cultural and social barriers I made for myself. Like, you can't go and just be a comedian. You got a family to support, or you might have a family to support one day and you want to move at your mum's house. But I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take a punt. And if it doesn't work, at least as extensionally, I'll never be really old. So I might be 30, but I won't be 60 being like, I could have been a contender. The Raging Bull regret.
I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you talked about jobs. What jobs did you have growing up?
Right, many. So my first job, I had a paper round.
Yeah, we all did that. Yeah.
Yeah, was terrible.
Yeah.
My second, I worked in Iceland, which was actually okay. I just kept myself to myself. Then I worked in Home Bargains up north. I worked in I worked in Home Bargains twice. Home Bargains. I worked in William Hill. I was a youth worker. I worked at Charlton Football Ground. Like, I worked at a job where like bus tables in like shopping centres.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. I think the last, then I was, William Hill. So that was for uni. Then when I graduated, I worked at Churchill in a call center doing claims. Then I worked for a publishing company called Haymarket, is business to business.
Right.
And sold classified ads. And then I sold jobs on Total Jobs.
Oh, wow.
And then I had a job working for Auto Trader as an agency exec. And then I worked at another job where I was working in data capture, this is like the old days where you had to fill out like very obvious forms online. And then they would, so basically early data capture that people do now, but it says click on this when they see zebra crossings and stuff. I was doing it when I was trying to do comedy as well. The last job I did, which was so soul destroying, because you might finish at like 5:30, 6, and then you've got like 2 hours to kill before you go to a gig. But then because it's rush hour, if you go home, then by the time I get home and I'm changed and everything like that, and living with my mom and my family's home and my sister's had a kid, then I'm like, I once remember my nephew couldn't have been more than 2 years old, or he's like potty training, and I just had to go to the toilet before a gig because I've got nerves and I'm getting ready to go to the gig. And he was like, I need to go to the toilet, and I can't leave a toddler outside of a toilet if he needs to go to the toilet. And I can't describe it, but I think I just had to suck it back up and onto that and clench until I got to a gig, all for the love of this young man. And a number of basically. So when you start doing comedy and people are like, so you drove to Derby for 20 quid.
Yeah.
It was great. Or when I spent my birthday eating a chicken mayo in a lay-by at Leicester Services.
I've done all of that, yeah.
After not getting through with the BBC New Act Comedy Award. And it's like, this don't feel great. It was still better than sitting at a desk when you know what's going to happen every day.
Yeah, I've done the claims. I've done the credit card. Credit cards was one I did for Christmas, and the bollocks that were on those forms.
Oh yeah,
absolutely sold a shot. The worst one, you're talking about a paper round. I remember one house, and they had a German Shepherd, and you'd put the paper in it, and every week it'd tear the paper up, and then one week it wasn't there, and I turned around and it was at the gate, and as I walked away, the gate opened, the gate blew open, and it chased me
That
down
is
the street.
ridiculous.
And you're thinking, I'm getting like £1 an hour for this.
Yeah, at best. Yeah, paper rounds are they're criminally underpaid. And I think at one point I was like, I'm not going to put a flyer for a Chinese restaurant and all these other places in this paper. And I just started getting pissed off and lazy and then started putting them under my bed. And my plan was these flyers, I'm just going to put them in the
Yeah.
recycled bin. And one day my mum was doing a room inspection because she just did that kind of thing. And she found the papers under the bed and she acted as if she found a kilo of coke under the bed. She was going mental. She was like, "Oh my god, they're gonna sue you." I was like, "What are they gonna sue me for? The £8 they pay me sometimes."
Yeah, that was it. It was what it was. It's like most people complain about a Monday morning. For me, it was the Thursday night getting in from school and seeing this big pile of papers.
Well, and I remember once I was walking, I had to do 156 papers and I had to do it in 2 trips because the trolley they gave me wasn't big enough. And I
Yeah.
remember once pulling it along and it's been so long. So like there was a rubber part along with the wheels that I just went away from just years of dragging this shit around everywhere. And I remember seeing this girl called Karina, who was like the girl of my dreams. And she saw me with that and I was like, what? Oh, loser,
Yeah.
such a loser. Life has to change. But, they were grounding experiences. I mean, I don't give a shit about the paper round, but like working in William Hill, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just
some of it was fun. I mean, it was to me, it was the kind of people that you kind of work with that made those kind of jobs because they're in the same position, and you're like, this is dog shit, but let's have a laugh.
Exactly, and everyone just thought everyone when I worked in like Iceland and stuff, they were just like, he's just so quiet. I was kind of like, oh, I can't remember the film, A History of Violence.
Yeah.
Like, it's like Dane's so quiet. What's he thinking of? What's he hiding? And I think very early on there, I was like crafting ideas and thinking about comedy or enjoying it very much and just and doing a lot of people watching.
Yeah.
A massive sociological study working in retail.
Was that? I mean, did that influence your kind of material? Then was that a big influence on your material? People watching.
I think yeah, definitely. I think I definitely have a wanderlust when it comes to humanity and just working out how people tick. I think between doing that and then I studied business at uni, which is a social science.
Right.
And initially it was kind of like, oh, how do you do business? More it went on, it was more about definitely looking at how fascinating I found it to motivate people to buy things they don't need and how much is it in that. And I think the theory behind business and studying things like occupational psychology and getting people to care about jobs that don't really have any practical application or would have no usage in a dystopian world. It was very interesting because there's so many jobs we have where it's like, if the world ended and we need to start again, no one probably needs a project manager, unfortunately.
No, probably not. Okay, I mean, just talking about your youth then, is there anything as you kind of move into the next chapter of your life, is there anything you miss about your youth, about growing up?
I'd miss not being in pain all the time after football. I think that's the thing. I think most people take their health for granted in their youth. And there was times when I definitely rolled an ankle or sprained an ankle and I was like, yeah, it's still lunchtime, baby. Come on. I'm playing and I probably should have done that. I probably should have rested it. But I think, yeah, the only thing I probably miss is the wellness of body. I think having the opportunity to do comedy has been amazing for me existentially and psychologically or even spiritually because I am one of the lucky people in the world who can say that I do what I want to do with my life.
Definitely,
and I don't have to turn around. I always, when I ever contemplated fatherhood, I never wanted to be somebody who was like, well, I could have, again, the raging bull rant towards my kids and be like, I could have done something, but you kids got to work hard. And so I'm expecting my first child in December.
Right.
And I am bricking it because obviously I wanted to be able to give my children a very opulent lifestyle. But everyone who has kids is like, you just have to be there for them and blah, blah, blah. And so fine. But mainly, I think the best thing about looking forward to fatherhood now is that I can genuinely tell my children to chase their dreams. Yeah. And I can do that in a genuine way. And at no point will I have to create a glass ceiling for them or try to dampen their Icarus complex because I've been there and I've had the opportunity to do it myself. And I think that's an important disposition to have as a parent. So it's cool.
Okay. Like you said, the world's changed a lot over the last few years. No, I spoke to a comedian. I can't remember who it was. probably the back end of when we started live shows started back up again, and he said comedy was kind of important because it was important to be out there and get people laughing again. I mean, is that something you'd agree with, especially these days?
Massively. I think it's massively important. I think my experience in comedy has definitely increased my appreciation for the art form and allowed me to recognize its importance. I still truly believe comedy is the most honest form of politics that most
Yeah,
human beings will be able to hear in their lifetimes. I definitely endeavor to be apolitical, but I think by that token of speaking about ideology and trying to gain majority agreement with my ideology is a very political act. I think, people say if you don't laugh, you'll cry. I think that's a very profound idea that we probably don't really appreciate as much as we should as people, because it's comedy is a very, very effective tool in terms of beginning the healing process for people that have experienced trauma or
yeah,
people trying to process their own trauma as well. I definitely think it can be very freeing like that. I also think that one of the most important things about comedy is that it definitely allows you to hear about people's life experience, which is one of the most effective ways to create commonality. Like, speaking as myself, when we talk about more minority and oppressed minority groups, whether they were, whether it's feminists, whether it's members of the transgender community, whether it's members of the LGBT plus community, in all honesty, I would have never been able to have the in-depth insight into their daily experiences without comedy, because that's where
right,
I've met
okay.
different people from different walks of life. It's allowed me to travel the world as well and see that there is so much mutuality between myself and other people and cultures. And I think, yeah, even when it comes down to the sitcom, a sitcom can show people and better than any politician can, and therefore unite people in ways that probably no other art form can do so well and so explicitly.
Yeah, I mean, just on something you touched on about traveling the world, and yeah, I mean, tying it in with something you mentioned about doing a comedy show and then playing to 14 people a day after. I mean, just seeing that one person laugh and kind of connect with you. I mean, what does that feel like as an artist or a comedian?
It feels great. I think I definitely have times where I guess the industrial side of show business can definitely frustrate me and depress me and be like, why the fuck do I even wash in the morning, much less get on stage?
Yeah,
Because we definitely live in a time now where your worth as a creative is measured quantitatively rather than qualitatively.
yeah,
Whereas it used to be that if you did something good, people liked it. Whereas now people can just do anything, and if it does numbers, then that is acceptable as or content is definitely trying to infiltrate art. But I'm always I have my resolve always renewed when I see somebody who may look like me but they're 20 years younger, who's like, yeah, I saw this of you and I thought it was cool, or someone's like, my son saw this, or I saw this. And I think I did a gig with a comedian a little while back, and he was like, yeah, bro, I used to watch you in uni. And for me, that's like massively inspiring, because
yeah,
I didn't really have anybody like that when I was in uni that I was aware of. So
right.
being able to provide that source of inspiration has been massive. And I think despite what people would lead you to believe nowadays through populism, you cannot buy respect. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you talked about traveling the world. I mean, of you can I'm assuming you've connected with the black comedians in other countries. Have they
Yeah,
kind of gone through
definitely.
similar experiences to you, or is it a completely different viewpoint or
I
attitude?
think it varies from country to country. I think comics that are based in the States probably have had a longer lineage than I have in terms of comedians that have been able to depict the African American experience. Um, and so there's definitely an opportunity for me to not so much prove myself, but when I perform and it resonates with them,
Yeah,
that's cool, because it means that I'm able to relate experience, not just in terms of what I'm saying, but the way I say it is relatable to audiences with a similar experience. It's very good for perspective as well, not just for black comics, maybe in Europe, for example, but as far afield as Australia. I understand that some of the setbacks I have had are minuscule in comparison to some of these guys who are only just trying to get their comedy scene
okay,
off the ground, especially post-pandemic. So I did the Johannesburg International Comedy Festival in 2018. But I had the opportunity to meet comics from not just from South Africa, but met comics from Malawi, met comics from Zambia, comics from Burundi, Nigeria. And yeah, to understand that your stuff works there is definitely inspiring. And yeah, I just it kind of gives you a responsibility to remember, like, you're in that instance, you are in a privileged position because of how British comedy has excelled, and it's probably one of the British comedy circuit is probably the best in the world.
Right.
So using that to elevate my position, and by that same token, be able to elevate everybody else as well. But yeah, performing around the world has definitely informed my material to make sure that I act locally but think globally when I'm putting it together.
Okay. I mean, just talking about locally and thinking especially about the UK, a lot of comedians kind of, I don't really use the word observational, but talk about real life and what's going on. Country's in a bit of a shit state at the moment. How hard is it to put a funny twist on that when you're writing?
For me, it's not that hard because it's been a large part of my style in the first place.
Yeah.
So I kind of discovered my comedy bones not just by like saying flippant things and people laughing at them. I think it would be I would go into a very detailed and very nuanced rant about the things that piss me off in society. And I
Okay.
guess, you know, if you don't laugh, you cry. So sometimes it would be met with laughter when I would speak about what I perceive to be, well, bullshit. And so
What
it's
sort of things are
almost,
we talking about?
well, I guess it'd be first of all like learning to basically articulate the what people call microaggressions today is
Right.
something that was very downplayed by my peers in comedy. So I had to find a very subversive way of addressing that within my work initially. I think speaking as well about, I said, because I kind of discovered, or I guess I became focused on comedy after the credit crunch and the introduction of austerity measures. I think social and or socioeconomic inequity or inequality has definitely been a big part of my work as well. And if I'm honest, Graham, like that for me was my point of contention with a lot of my predecessors. Like a lot of the comments I saw frequently on Mock the Week or like in shows like The Last Leg, I just kind of felt like you're kind of approaching certain things with kid gloves. And that can be a problem sometimes because I think when people are like, well, you know, Boris Johnson's a bit of a rogue, like, oh, he's a bit of a bad boy. It's like, no, this person is a fucking sociopath. And if
Yeah.
you regard anything less, you are legitimizing his behavior.
Yeah.
So for me, yeah, because it's not really a problem. And also, I guess the way comedy has evolved within the context of like social media and podcasts have been the natural progression for a lot of comics. I now have different platforms where I can talk about things in a more comical way, but if I want to get in more depth and maybe sometimes take a much more acerbic view,
Yeah.
I can also use podcasts as well. But I
I
think
mean,
for
does
some
that?
comics, but for me, I've not really given a shit. So I have always said what I want. And
Yeah.
sometimes people are like, you should calm down, Dane. And I'm like, yeah, well, I am being calm, but it's very hard to keep calm in the face of a lot of the bullshit that we're dealing with at the moment.
I mean, just I've talked to a lot of musicians that have struggled over the last 2 or 3 years, 3, 4 years, and it's not getting any better. But the kind of
It's because we're all fucked in that, like, austerity has had a significant effect on all of our median disposable income.
yeah,
And what that's meant for artists is that because just your average audience does not have the money and the time now because they are in an environment where they are at best cash rich, time poor, which is some marketing bullshit that they made up. But what it means is that people don't have as much money as they used to. And if you don't have a lot of money,
absolutely,
it's hard for you to be a patron to the arts. And what
yeah,
that's meant for artists is that normally, historically, where we'd be able to kind of have our own followings and you could still make a decent living as a musician, they've music has definitely been hampered by the introduction of the reality talent show because
no, yeah,
before you could
yeah,
be a good comic
yeah,
and you could be a good tribute act and you may only just play the Midlands or you might only just play the Southwest and you can make a decent living from doing that. But now you've been put on this stage where you are either being used for ratings and then discarded, or it's not good enough for you to be like a good musician with a decent following. Everyone's chasing this superstardom. And the problem with that is the other problem with the decline in people's disposable income to enjoy things like the arts. There's been a reduction in funding, which means people don't really have access to studios and stuff. And I think probably one of the most disturbing things is that now musicians or creators in general are at the behest of corporations because they are the people with the money to be able to elevate your career, which is why you've probably seen a shift in like music videos nowadays are basically adverts.
yeah,
So if you can't sell a thing or at the end of your musical or artistic message does not encourage some form of consumerism, it's very hard for you to prosper because if you can't sell, then they can't sell, then they're a lot less likely to invest in you. So It's very tough for musicians, and it's tough across the board. And it's mainly because I find it very, and that's why I find it so strange when I see right wing like artists or right wing comedians. I'm like, you do realize if your government didn't fuck them people over and people had more money, they'd have more money to come and see you, idiots.
Yeah. It makes no sense.
How can you be right wing when it's like the less people have, the less money they have to invest in things like art and coming to see you and buying your merch, you stupid.
It's I mean, on the flip side of that, the kind of lockdown for musicians, it opened up a lot of doors for trying different things like podcasting and live streaming and stuff like that. I mean, I saw a band that did a gig at an asylum, which was absolutely stunning to watch. But as a creator, does the kind of new opportunities excite you?
They definitely do, but I think it's exciting, but it can be daunting at the same time because what's suggested to a lot of people, and I think it's always been the same way, is that corporate interests will elevate somebody to a position, and you'll see someone enjoying amazing success, but represented financially. And so there's a lot of pressure. People think, oh, if this is what made this person successful, I need to do the same thing. So I'll notice that like a comedian might do skits and they'll put a wig on. And because they become successful, then everyone starts getting wigs and everyone starts doing the same kind of thing. So I think that seems to be a bit more of there was initially a lot of democratization along things like social media and digital media.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a question of getting where you fit in. But I think inevitably, anytime it gets too successful, then corporate entities will get involved. And so, for example, Twitter used to be somewhere like, you could see a few Twitter comedians or people with good ideas, and that could transcend into a podcast, or they could have a paywall and you can support them directly, or like a band could do like a crowd fund and they can encourage people to like pay for them just to produce an album if they love that band in particular. But then there was a lot of untalented people whose only talent is that their parents were rich and they didn't like the way everybody else was getting on. And so they did something like buy a whole social media platform. Yeah. So, I mean, there's opportunities, but it's just up to people to all decide in what direction we want to go, where we're going to value the art over we're going to value the wealth.
I had a very similar conversation with an artist who'd done like a not a customer club, but you signed up and you got his music for free, but you paid so much, but you got to choose the music that went on the albums. It was a really clever way of doing it, and because he was just like generally a creator who created music on similar to you under different kind of acronyms and stuff, and he put it together and he put compilation albums out of like 10 or 15 songs that you literally couldn't get anywhere else. But he said he wanted to keep his audiences small, so he knew they were appreciating his music and getting what they wanted. So I think it's a kind of similar sort of thing.
Yeah.
Just to finish then, I mean, to be honest with you, I could sit and talk to you for hours, but we're running out of time. I just wanted to know, in terms of the last few years, is there anything new that's come into life that's put a smile on your face? Like, I'm thinking things like cooking online and the kind of gym classes online, going back to what you said about the beginning about hating the gym.
I think that I think, as I said, seeing people exploiting the new opportunities and because obviously sometimes you worry that, like, especially at a time now where it's very clear that we are mining all of our nostalgia for like profit, and there seems to be a lot of rehashing of intellectual properties coming back, and it's weird that they're dividing people, where people are like, well, why are they doing all women Ghostbusters, and why are they doing this? It's because like the reason why there's a Black Little Mermaid is because Disney want to make more money off of that intellectual property. And so they're going to rehash it. And if they could, they'll make it a dog as well. They don't give a fuck as long as people buy the merch. And so when I see people coming up with new novel ideas and novel approaches to stuff, it's always very exciting. So in particular, like I've seen the rise of people like Mo Gilligan, who's inspiring, and Nigel Ng, who basically started off just doing a video about making rice, and that went viral and became Uncle Roger. With the whole Uncle Roger brand. But yeah, I feel like also the Have a Word podcast as well, where that started during lockdown, and that's now become like a phenomenon in terms of like as an idea and a format, which is completely uncensored and not at the behest of like gatekeepers in media. So I think, yeah, anytime the underdog can do well and take care of themselves and their families without fucking up resources and with art, I think it's always a good it's a win for humanity overall. Because I think sometimes my problem is when I get very frustrated with myself, I'm like, I wish my brain could shut up and I could do stuff like not give a fuck about the planet and stuff and be rich, but I don't think anybody's like that really. So anytime I can see anyone who is able to realize success or realize their potential. I think that's good for everyone. I think that's important for us all to play. So
to win all around.
Yeah, win all around that. And also, I think, as we become much more dependent upon and artificial intelligence and automation becomes part of our lives, I believe that artistic expression will be the only thing we have left to define our humanity by. So
I agree with you on that. Yeah, like I said, we're running out of time. But to be honest with you, I could sit and talk to you for hours. We definitely do need to do this again at some point.
I'm absolutely up for it. It'd be a pleasure.
First of all, congratulations on fatherhood and good luck with that. I hope it all works out for you. And
I'm breaking it, but got a good tag team, so it should be good.
Next 18 months then for Dane Baptiste, where do you see it going? What do you see?
The ideal thing in the next 18 months would be in a position whereby I can look after my new family. I am hoping to start making more inroads in the States and doing more shows over there, because that's definitely my dream, is to make sure that my stuff flies over there. And maybe a few formats that I've kind of devised, some scripted ideas for some sketch and some kind of more novel sitcom ideas. I hope that can come to fruition. My podcast is Baptiste Questions Everything, so I hope that grows in audience and appeal. But on the whole, just being a good person is most important, and a good daddy, I guess. That's my main thing. Be a good dad and a good partner, and a good /husband, and simple old man stuff.
Yeah, simple old man stuff. And on that note, then, somewhat Bapsquire in one sentence, just to wrap it up.
Classic, funny, mature. Dane's back like I never left.
Perfect. That's a great way to end. I mean, thank you for this. It's been really good talking to you. And like I said, there's definitely plenty of unanswered questions I still want to talk to you about. So we will do this again very soon.